comes in the name of the Lord. Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Things have changed. Have you seen it? The way that we've done things for centuries has been unsettled and unseated. We're living in a new normal, and while on the surface many of these things look like the next best thing, they're actually complex and fragile webs of lies holding it all together. Lies like you are what you do, or you are what you experience, you are who you know, or you are what you know, or you are what you own, or you are who you raise, or you are your past. In his new book, in You Are What You Do, author and pastor Daniel M. considers these 7 lies in the context that causes them to flourish. Through personal stories, research, and pastoral insight, Daniel will show you how to recognize these everyday lies in your life so that you can discover the truth on the other side. The truth that leads to freedom. The truth that moves you from surviving to thriving. The truth will unlock a life of purpose, adventure, meaning, and destiny. Daniel is a senior associate pastor at Beulah Alliance Church, a multiplying multi-site church focused on reaching 1% of Edmonton for Christ. He co-hosts the new church's Q&A podcast and a podcast with his wife on marital and parenting called the Im Between podcast. He has a master's in global leadership and has served and pastored in church plants and multi-site churches ranging from 100 people to 50,000 people in Vancouver, Ottawa, Montreal, Korea, Edmonton, and Nashville. Because of their love for the local church and after pioneering and leading the church multiplication initiative for Lifeway in Nashville, they recently moved back to Canada. Here to talk about his new book, You Are What You Do, and 6 other lies about work, life, and love, is Daniel M. Daniel, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Hey, it's so great to be with you today.
Well, we're delighted to have you. You have such a fascinating story. You're Korean.
Mm-hmm.
Your wife's Korean.
She's Chinese.
Oh, she's Chinese. That's right.
Yes.
Who would be Chinese?
Yes.
Where did you grow up? What city?
In Vancouver, born and raised.
Okay,
Vancouver,
born and
Canada.
raised. Vancouver, Canada. So over the other side.
Mm-hmm.
An amazing city.
Yeah.
A cultural melting pot with almost as diverse as some of the communities in Asia. Finding a home there. Not sure if it didn't grow out of the railroad industry and all the labor that was brought to America, and then the gold rush and so many other things. And then Vancouver, both Washington and BC both became intriguing places. It's like the closest around the world trip you can take.
It sure is. I mean, the diversity in the city is so metropolitan. I remember growing up, even in high school, that my high school had more Asians than non-Asians, and it wasn't just one group of Asians, but just Asians from all over. It was just fascinating to be a part of. I mean, that was just normal for me growing up.
Now, we know that there's a season of great revival. Korea representing one of the most vivacious, contagious centers of prayer, power, evangelism, mission. America, I think, is number 3 on their targeted countries to evangelize because they think that we have dropped the ball. It's fascinating when I deal with the Korean community, a lot in Israel, but we're also watched as a program in many parts of South Korea. So we're very popular because we are, if you look at the time, we don't look at it from an American time, we look at Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, trying to hit the prime time slots in those countries, because why do I want to be 11 o'clock in the morning in America?
Compete with the daytime shows.
It doesn't make any sense. And people ask us that question, who are you? Well, me being Jewish, I'm a Romans 1:16 person. It's to the Jew first. So we're going to be prime time in Israel.
Yeah.
And we're going to create and fulfill the great commission, not the great omission. And the great omission is to preach to everybody but the Muslims and the Jews. Well, we preach to the Muslims and the Jews first, because that's what the calling is here. Take me back to growing up. Your Korean roots. Was it a strong cultural influence, or were you pretty well assimilated? Your family pretty well assimilated into American culture?
Oh, well, my dad and mom both immigrated to Canada in the 70s. My dad straight out of the military in Korea, and my mom having grown up in a Buddhist family. So my dad grew up in a Christian family. His mom was this revivalist teacher, missionary around Korea, and my mom, she grew up in a Buddhist family, 3 older brothers, 3 younger brothers, and it was in her senior year of high school where she had started going to church on the arm of one of her friends, and she gave her life to Christ, and basically she didn't ever want to be a pastor, but she was like, man, if Jesus is real and this Christianity thing is real, I better learn more about it, because this is like life changing. So she decided to go to Bible college out of high school, and basically they met during that, immigrated to Canada in the 70s. So I grew up in in a home that only spoke Korean. I mean, I remember going to elementary school and having to do some ESL classes because my sisters and I were all born in Vancouver, but Korean was the only language that was spoken. So it was just this interesting dynamic of I would eat Korean, I would dress, I mean, I guess I would dress however Walmart dressed, however the clothes were there, because, I mean, my parents as immigrants didn't have too much money. And we were just kind of grew up a normal Canadian lifestyle, but on the weekends, eating-wise, everything else was Korean. So it very much was this mixed component of being both Canadian and being both Korean, which ultimately led to quite an identity crisis in high school.
It's so interesting because we have the same in the Jewish community. We just were recognized as a nationality, which the Bible clearly declared that we were. But this is the first census that was taken where I filled out other, because the president had acknowledged that if you were Jewish, that was your national origin. That was you could identify. And so the first time I ever filled out a census, 68 years old, that I could truly put Jewish and know that it was me recognized as something in America, not put myself down as Caucasian, but Jewish. And it felt great. But we lived in the same way. We had the Jewish world and the American world, and the weekends were spent immersed in your Jewish world, and then we had what we called reentry. And you re-entered back in, and the period in which I grew up in, of course, was the period when we were still in Korea and then moved to Vietnam, out of the Korean War into Vietnam. So I'm a early 50s, first post-Holocaust generation. In this cultural, what would you call it, mashup?
That's a good word.
Yeah, this cultural mashup of your mother and father both being believers, raised you to be a believer. Was that unique in the Korean community, or I'm here in Birmingham, Alabama. We have several Korean churches here in Birmingham.
Yeah.
and a fairly large Korean community, but they still identify as the Korean church.
Yes, that's right. I mean, you think the history of Christianity in Korea and the Presbyterian influence in there, and you even just look at post-Korean War and the number of megachurches that there are now, and just how rapidly Christianity grew. I remember being on a mission trip in Thailand. And talking to a pastor and a missionary there, and them saying, "Hey, we really look up to and admire the church in Korea because 100 years ago, the number of Christians in Thailand were the same number of Christians in Korea. And now it's completely different. So there's a sense of the rapid growth of Christianity in Korea and how, so you just kind of have that sense, right? And then coming to Vancouver, it's fascinating when you think about the immigrant church. And this is not only Vancouver, but it would be true for Birmingham. And I would even say there's parallels to the Jewish community anytime they immigrate somewhere else. It's like the year that they immigrate is the year that their sense of culture is set in stone. So it's interesting when you look at the church that I grew up in Vancouver. I mean, the pastor immigrated in the 60s and the 70s, and that's what Christianity looked like. That was the sense of what Korean Christianity looked like. So there's a sense of, okay, preserving culture. So there was definitely the sense of going to church on the weekends, being full on Korean, spending all day at church and with that community. And there's that sense of, I'd go to Korean. Yes, I would have Bible study, I would have Sunday school, but I'd also have Korean lessons in Korean school because they're trying to preserve that culture. So it was definitely an interesting dynamic.
It very much parallels my life. I mean, we were. My father was an immigrant. My mother's father, my grandfather, was an immigrant. He came in 1904. My father came in 1934. But we basically colonize an area. We come in and we plant our community centers. We plant our synagogues. We plant our hospitals. We plant our home for the aged. We plant our youth centers. We colonize an area to keep a cultural identity, so that when you talk about the Jewish community of Vancouver, they probably live in a particular geographical neighborhood. In every city I've lived in, from New York to Atlanta to Birmingham, there's been a Jewish community that's very cohesive. And
yes, you're right.
We're not going to let go of that identity because it's not hyphenated. It's kind of some of the confusion that we have with trying to reconcile with an African American. Should I be a Jewish American? Should you be a Korean American? There's a clash of identity in some ways, but you went on to college and got a master's in global leadership, which has, from a John Maxwell, he'd be crazy in love with you, but it has nothing to do with the Bible.
Oh, my master's?
Yeah.
No, it was from a seminary.
Oh, it was a seminary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Fuller Theological Seminary.
All right. So, so this was planting churches, developing leadership within churches.
It was within the School of Intercultural Studies, or the School of Missiology at Fuller. So the bent in the degree, because I did all my theology courses and all that, and Hebrew and Greek and such. The difference, though, was that the emphasis was very much toward a missional outlook, so being a missionary wherever you are. And in my perspective, I was thinking, I think of myself as a missionary in the West, or a missionary here in Edmonton. So instead of taking an approach of, hey, what does it look like to be a pastor, to shepherd, the idea with that degree was, hey, what does it look like for us to be missionaries wherever we live? So, I mean, not everyone in the program was a pastor like me, but everyone was in some sense of they were maybe in a nonprofit work or working with. I mean, one of my classmates is in Lebanon, and he works with orphans and has a nonprofit ministry there. So it was an interesting degree because it was really focused in and around missiology.
Very important because the mission field is dynamically changing. There's a great deal of persecution. There are new paradigms. And honestly, the Catholic Church kind of owned the territory for a very long time. And the Reformation came along, and you bumped up against heavily populated Catholic communities that you were an outsider. It would be easier to go to an Aboriginal colony and introduce the gospel than it would have been in parts of Africa, in trying to get past the mission orientation of 1,400 years of mission work. Not that it should be unseated, not that it doesn't have a very strong purpose and a very valuable contribution, but opening up the opportunity. This project that you took on of these myths, these things we bought into, these are all very much steeped in the flesh. They are spiritless. They're devoid of spirit. It is an identity which has been imprinted on us since the 60s.
Yeah.
And that's really, and you think about it in conversations you have when people say to you, "Hi, what's your name? What do you do?" That was the natural. So now when I'm defined by what I do, okay? Not who I am, okay? Not what I believe, not how I live. And people began to buy into that. And so we have this consumer culture that I am what I wear. I am who I hang out with. I am what I appear to be on social media. And it's actually a fraud-based concept in presenting something that I am not in order to find acceptance, because rejection is the anathema of every person's life. So,
well put.
So these are all steeped in insecurity.
Yeah.
What brought you to look at this model for what people might put into the category of stinking thinking?
That's well put. Stinking thinking. It was interesting because I didn't really set out to write a book on identity or necessarily even on these lies. The thing that fascinated me was the rapid growth of the gig economy. And the gig economy is this sense where you're self-employed in a part-time or a full-time capacity, getting paid for your time, skills, possessions, or expertise, right? So you're not getting a paycheck from an employer, you're making money on your own using an app or not using an app, right? So it's interesting because I stumbled across this research. And as I continued to dig into the gig economy, I recognized that 35% of the American workforce was a part of it. I mean, that's 57 million Americans who are self-employed in a part-time or a full-time capacity, right? Getting paid for their time, skills, possessions, or expertise. And when I thought about that number, 57 million people, I mean, that's more than Canada, Liberia, Greece, and Puerto Rico combined. I mean, that's a lot of people. And as I dug into it more, I realized that about 68% of all gig workers surveyed joined the gig economy in the last 5 years. Now, that's not just in the US, Canada, UK or Australia, where I dug into the research. But I mean, the number one globally on Google Trends, number one country that searches this the most is Singapore. So, I mean, this really is a global phenomenon and how it increased. So, as I continued to dig into that, I was like, okay, wait a second. If the way that we have worked and the way that we are working is changing so drastically, what is this doing to our identity? What is this doing to our souls? What is this doing to the way that we view the world? And I discovered that the gig economy, the core lie of the gig economy, is a life of freedom and flexibility. It's a life of ultimate control. So when you think about this and you think, oh, you're on social media and you see one of your friends on vacation somewhere else, and then you feel bad about yourself because you're in your PJs with toothpaste on your sweater, just eating instant noodles for dinner, and they're over there eating some banquet over in Greece, and you're like, oh, and then what happens is the gig economy subtly says, hey, the reason you're not doing that is because you're not hustling enough. Go stop watching Netflix, stop being on social media so much, go get another job, go gig, go use your car to drive, go do this, and then you'll get more, and then you'll have more freedom. You'll have more flexibility. You will be in control of your life. And that's what the gig economy, and it's fascinating because I believe that's how the gig economy has so rapidly increased, because it's stinking thinking, right? I mean, it's this allure, it's the lie from the garden, from the serpent, that evil serpent that's saying, hey, you want control, you want freedom, you want flexibility, well, here you go. So what ends up happening is, in the book, the 7 lies are derivatives of this core lie of a life of freedom and flexibility or control.
All antithetical to God's economy of fellowship, unity, collaboration. 2 heads are better than 1. There's wisdom in a multitude of godly counsel. Many hands make for light work. I mean, just go on through, and all of a sudden you see that Uber and Lyft, and then there's so many other ways. And we've also done I don't want to say a disservice, but I think it's a deliberate, targeted group. And it's targeted at those that would like to be the I ams of Isaiah that Satan spoke, that the I wills, I will ascend to the throne of heaven, all these things I will do. And the truth of the matter is that yes, it's true. Stephen Jobs and Rick Wozniak started Apple in a garage. That was a gig. It was a gig.
It was.
It was a gig.
It was. No one was paying them.
You know,
They're starting their own thing.
Right. Hewlett and Packard.
Yeah.
Right. Who used to be with Hewlett and Packard, and actually your first day at work as an HP, you're given the book. And you're told that your orientation is to read the story of the 2 guys in the garage, of how Hewlett-Packard was formed and founded on a gig economy. Now we find independence, which breeds isolation, and with this COVID-19 virus, people are dealing with issues that they've never had to deal with before, and it magnifies the fact that the idea of being set apart is biblical, but the idea of being isolated is unbiblical. Set apart is one thing. Leave your lech lecha, leave. Go leave your family and go to the place that I will show you. Go leave to become Abraham, to become one set apart. But we've been defining ourselves by what we do since after World War II.
Yeah.
That's when it began. That was the recovering economy after World War II. What do you do? And that's how you introduced yourself. That's really, I think, one of the times when, excuse me, degrees began to matter more significantly. PhDs began to, it seemed like all of a sudden we were cranking out doctors like crazy, because that was the impressive lead of who you were, and you were defined that way. It removed God from the equation of, and it's so Greek. It's just so darn Greek. Everything was about the self. Everything was comparative between you and Adonis, where you, and then out of that sprung what? The Aryan concept, which was devastating, and still exists today because Iran in Arabic means Aryan. So they changed their name from Persia to Iran because the Shah liked the agenda that was going on in Germany for an ethnic cleansing to create a perfect race.
Really fascinating.
What a way to perpetuate these lies.
Wow.
And making it so that everybody's the same. And they are lies. They refute the testimony of the Bible. I want to dig into this a little bit more, but we've got to take a break. We're talking with Daniel M., author of You Are What You Do and 6 Other Lies About Work, Life, and Love. This is an identity crisis like we've never seen, where we have allowed ourselves to the self-definition, the self-identity that we become so in love with, is a Copernican kind of thinking that is so flawed that it puts us at the center of the universe. Now, Copernicus, of course, was rejected by his fellow scientists when he postulated that the sun was the center of the universe and all the planets revolved around, and he died as a disgraced scientist, only to be proven right. But for those of you that have this new Copernican view that the world revolves around you, you're going to live in that same kind of space that he wound up in, which was rejection. How can you ever measure up when all you're doing is comparing? Yeah. So everything becomes relative to another standard, not the one standard that God gave us, which was the conformation, and transformation into the image of Messiah. Who am I in Messiah is the question we should be asking. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to rejoin Daniel M. and dispute, refute, and cast down these lies that maybe you have been living with and thought you had no other choice. We'll be right back. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. We're talking with Daniel Im, author of You Are What You Do and 6 Other Lies About Work, Life, and Love. Daniel, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be here.
Daniel, when an author writes a book, he either first writes it for himself because of his own struggles, and if it's my struggle, then it's everybody's struggle. As a congregational leader, even as a father, if I was cold, I told my daughter to put on a sweater. That's how we are.
Yeah.
But every author has somebody in mind that they hope they're going to reach with this message. Who was your model? Who was your target? What was your bullseye for this message?
So first and foremost, yes, I've believed all 7 lies. I think it's a part of our culture today.
Yes.
But honestly, as I was writing the book, yes, there was a sense of, okay, how have I come against this? And it is a struggle daily, some lies more than others. But really, I was thinking about the mom who was rediscovering herself as her children are growing older. I was like, well, okay, I've been staying at home for this long, but now my kids don't really need me as much. Now what? And that mom who was going through that crisis of, okay, I'm not who I raised, so what do I do now? Do I go back to what I did before kids? Do I start something new? I was writing it for that mom. I was also writing it for the dad who was wrestling with the tension of being present for his children while also trying to make ends meet. I was writing it for the student who is not convinced in school that, hey, a 9-to-5 traditional job is going to be what they were doing this all for, but they didn't really know what else was out there. And then they heard about this thing called the gig economy and doing a side hustle. And I was like, well, maybe that's That's what I should do and how I should build my life. So I wrote it for that student as well, to help them understand what lies they would be walking into. I wrote it for the individual who was looking for clarity around purpose, who is looking for clarity around identity, because man, there is so much confusion in our culture about who we are, as you've so aptly put, up until now, and where our worth comes from. And then also for those individuals who have accepted and are a part of the gig economy and who are hustling and doing multiple jobs. I wrote it for them, those people who are tired of it, who are tired of that kind of life of constant go, 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 and never really getting the carrot at the end of the stick and wondering, is there something different?
You know, we have a program, excuse me, television program called Shark Tank. You may have seen it.
Yeah.
It's really quite interesting. Mark Cuban went to high school, grew up in Pittsburgh, where I grew up, and went to high school in the other Jewish community of Pittsburgh. So he was from an area called Mount Lebanon. I was from Squirrel Hill. We were competitive Jewish communities, which
That's awesome.
Which is really in a funny, but even today, if you were from that, you're just not really close friends. You're a little standoffish.
It's fascinating.
From a different colony, almost. You speak the same language, but maybe a different dialect. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But in there, they talk about the hustle. 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 Are you pounding it? Are you, you know? And there's these success stories, and so we have that being perpetuated, and then we have the other aspect where people have stopped reading the Bible. They've just become biblically illiterate. And so if you were to ask me in my corporate years, how was I defined? You know, I would define it by how many times I was number one in the country, or how you know, I was standing in the chairman of the board of Ford Motor Company's office, and we sealed a $35 million deal with a handshake. And everybody said, and I worked for AT&T, everybody said, well, that's not a real contract. And I said, well, you tell him that's not a real contract, because he's expecting me to have a team here tomorrow because he said he would make it so. And I'm going to deploy a team. And if you have to fire me, then fire me. And they let me deploy the team, and he honored the agreement. And then, of course, the lawyers got involved, but we started the project the next day based on a handshake.
Yeah.
That was a different world. Today, you have people who are struggling to figure out who they are, and because they don't have an identity in Messiah, we're seeing suicide rates. Let's look at the end result of this gig economy. We have isolationism, we have narcissism, we have suicide, we have the highest rate of anxiety and depression, the most number of sleep prescriptions written at any time in human history. More people are on sleep medication because of anxiety, worry, night terrors. This is the perfect setup for the wild kingdom mentality that says, if I can break you out, call you out of the herd as the weak one, then I can get you over here by yourself, and then I can attack you. That's the byproduct of this kind of thought process, is it not?
There's so many unintended consequences to this, right? You mentioned the COVID-19 reality that we're in, and it's fascinating how important of a role the gig economy is playing right now in light of this reality where Amazon is hiring. A lot of other companies are letting people go. Amazon is hiring because people are afraid to walk out and go, and there's just a sense of hey, okay, there's this, the gig economy, our culture says is a very positive thing. Look, there's no way that you're going to be able to get your groceries or this or that without the gig economy. How are you going to get restaurant food now? Only because of the gig economy, right? So we see this way that the culture is saying, hey, this is great. Freedom, flexibility, you are in control of your time and your schedule. What is better than that? That is the American dream. You have fully, you only reason you're not in a mansion is because you haven't hustled enough. So hustle, get on Shark Tank and get that, and it's all yours. You just need to believe it enough. You need to work hard at it enough, and then you'll get it. The problem, though, is that there's a whole whackload of unintended consequences with each of these lies, and when we follow these lies and actually we will stumble into the unintended consequences of anxiety, of sleeplessness, of disappointment, of right, and you just and ultimately contentment is the thing that the gig economy kind of allures you with, and it is impossible to achieve contentment through the gig economy or through building your life on any of these lies, because contentment only comes through Jesus.
I hesitate to say that it's easy to identify the lie. It's easy to identify the consequence of the lie. But from an evangelical standpoint, getting somebody to face the realities of these lies with a truth which is quite extraordinary, which is Jesus. How do we leverage the gig economy for Messiah?
Yeah. I absolutely love the Sermon on the Mount. And it was actually the very first seminary course I did, just studying Matthew chapter 5 to 7. And there's so much depth in how Jesus interacted and how he interacted with his culture in that same manner. And it's fascinating, because I wonder what would happen if we actually approached our culture and the gig economy today much in the same way that Jesus approached his via the Sermon on the Mount. There's this pattern of languaging that he uses. He says, "You have heard it was said, but I tell you." Right? He says in Matthew 5:21, "You have heard it was said to our ancestors, do not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, everyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment." Right? He says, "You have heard it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." So he keeps on going back. "You've heard it was said, but I say to you. You've heard it was said, but I say to you." What if we did the same thing with these lies of the gig economy, right? And we said, "Hey, you've heard it was said, you are what you do. But I say to you, you are a child of God. You've heard it was said, you are what you experience. But I say to you, no, you are a new creation in Christ. You have heard it was said, you are who you know. But I say to you, you are known by our loving Savior, Jesus. You've heard it was said, you are what you own. But I say to you, no, you are complete in Jesus. You've heard it was said, you are who you raise. But I say to you, no, you and your children are God's masterpiece, and that is enough. And lastly, you have heard it was said, you are your past. But I say to you, I love this in Romans 8, you are free from all condemnation in Christ Jesus. I mean, imagine if we approached the gig economy and we approached these lies. Yes, here are the lies. I don't think we can get rid of them. But we say, hey, yes, I get this, but here's the truth on the other side.
So it's almost a point-counterpoint.
You're right.
It's a tennis match. But as you were talking, I was thinking about the 23rd Psalm. Every line of the 23rd Psalm has a reference point. The Lord is my shepherd. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I shall not want. My Lord provides all of my needs according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. It is a messianic psalm, and every line connects It is a spider web of connection points that every line very specifically crafted in a way that points to something that Jesus said or did, and it tells you about eternal life, for I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So we have basic tools. Now, you're in Canada, and I've always had a Canada's always been a foreign country to America, as I'm sure you're well aware.
Yep.
Although I watch Canadian movies and programs because I think they have better, more real characters. There are no actors. These are all real people playing real parts, just like they do every day. They're just happen to be in a story. Because I've met so many unique characters from Canada. Do you find that and I know Montreal, I know Toronto, Hamilton, Vancouver are caught up in a lot of the cosmopolitan, metropolitan allure of these traps, and these are traps. These are definitely traps. What's it like in Edmonton for you? Or do you, as you address that community, and you use the 1% of reaching 1% of Edmonton? The population of Edmonton is 11 people. So, you know, I really want to encourage you to expand your horizons just a little bit, but no, I don't know what the population.
It's a million.
A million people. But are you finding it's the same? It's the same no matter where you go, whether or not you're metropolitan, whether or not you're rural, whether or not you're urban. Is it? You talk about the mother who's raised children. She's middle-aged now. She's not a millennial. Is this a millennial phenomena? Is this something that is heavily weighed toward millennials?
No, it's fascinating. In the research, boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, everyone, all generations today, right now, of the working age are a part of this. And now you obviously see if this many boomers are a part of the gig economy, you then have this many more Gen X, this many more millennials, this many more Gen Z. But you actually see a lot of boomers, especially after retirement, joining the gig economy out of boredom or you just, there's so many different reasons. There's like, well, I remember meeting this one guy who's a principal, and he was like, okay, I did retirement for 3 months and I got so bored of it that I just started driving Uber. And I don't need the money, but it's spending money when we go on vacation. And there's a ton of different reasons people are involved in this. But when I think about the COVID-19 crisis, I think what this has brought to the surface more than any other event in our lifetime, or at least in my lifetime, is just how globalized and how small the world is. I mean, yes, globalization is a thing, and it's obviously been around for a while and continue to increase. But especially this is like, what else are we experiencing where whether you live in Birmingham or Boston or Beirut or wherever, right? I mean, we're all experiencing this same phenomenon, this same pandemic. And what's fascinating about it all is that when you look at each of these lies, it doesn't matter where you live. At least one or a few of these lies are going to be seeped into the culture because of how globalized we now are.
This social, what do they call it? Social distancing. What's
social distancing.
Social distancing. Driving. I mean, the whole thing is very diabolical. In just what the backstory to it is. And several years ago, I wrote a biblical thriller, became a bestseller, based on weaponized DNA. So it's not a concept I'm not unfamiliar with. How is this? So people's paychecks, there's in some countries, here in America, they're trying to find a way to protect your paycheck. Other countries may not have the ability to do that. So people are looking for, where am I going to get my next meal? How am I going to, and how creative can I be? Yeah. People are making masks, sitting at home, sewing together masks and selling them to their friends. I can't tell you how many thousand posts I've seen on Facebook of, I'll mail it to you.
That's the gig economy.
That's the gig economy. A brewery in Birmingham is no longer making beer. They are making
sanitizer.
Hand sanitizer. So their barrels are filled with hand sanitizer. And so it's like, they're bottling in their beer facility, they're bottling hand sanitizer. So this is opportunistic. We've got about 2 minutes. I'd like you to leave our audience with a final word and a reminder that these not only are things that are lies, but they are traps, and they are the bear trap. They're not the little wood that falls down on you. They're the ones that get you, and it's on a chain, and they hold you captive unless somebody comes along to bind up the brokenhearted and set the captive free. Leave us with a word of encouragement and inspiration that we can get past this.
Yeah. If you remember that the core lie that stitches all of these lies together is that myth of freedom and flexibility and that life of ultimate control. If you keep that in mind, what we need to understand with that as the core lie and all these 7 other ones is that there is truth on the other side. And as believers, we need to share this with gentleness and respect, as it says in 1 Peter 3:16, especially now that people are wondering, where is my next paycheck going to come from? How am I going to make this work? And instead of saying the gig economy is evil and to stay away from it, I think it's fine to participate in it as long as you understand that there is truth on the other side of these lies. Because when we do that, we're going to move from being slaves to children, from being enslaved to free, from having no inheritance to full inheritance, from being a worker to being an heir, and from being defined by what we do, what we experience, who we know, what we own, who we raise in our past, to the truth, which is that we need to be defined by what Jesus has done for us. It's not what we do for Jesus. It's not what we do. It's what Jesus has already done and finished and completed on the cross for each and every one of us, where he has set the table. He has set the table for us all to come in. He says, "Come, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Where the culture says, "Go, go, 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 go," Jesus says, "Come, and I will give you the rest that you are hoping you'll get at the end of this tunnel of whatever gig you're doing." No, you won't. You'll only get more of that busyness, more of that loneliness, more of that isolation. Jesus says, "No, come to me and I will give you a rest." He will move us from ashes to beauty. And that's the gospel.
Amen. On this day of Passover, Yom Pesach, the day where we remember God's deliverance from our bondage in Egypt, will you remember your bondage to the lies that you've been living with, that you're defined by what you do? No, God defines you, and your abilities and your gifts are all given to you by God for His glory and for you to be in His presence. And once you accept that, then you open up a different route and floodgate of blessing that is not wealth, it may not be great success, but it is a peace and a promise that can never be broken. That's what God gives you. Daniel Im, author of You Are What You Do and 6 Other Lies About Work, Life, and Love. Thank you. Thank you for tackling a kind of in-your-face kind of message that says to those in the gig economy that, yeah, you can go out there and make a living and do it, but you are not the center of the universe, that there is a God out there providing opportunity for you. And every now and then he'd like to hear from you. And by the way, call your mom.
Fantastic.
Daniel Im, thank you. Thank you for sharing this with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you.
God bless you. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.